So again, my name is Christopher Lowe. I am founder of the Team Coaching Zone and really excited today, along with a couple of sister organizations. So we have the International Coaching Federation New York City chapter, we have Renewal Associates, Peter Hawkins Company, and the Academy of Executive Coaching New York City chapter, hosting today's special webinar with the one and only Professor Peter Hawkins. And I think a man who doesn't need a whole lot of introduction, but we'll go ahead and do that. Peter has graciously agreed to come today to share some of his thoughts about his pioneering work in the area of systemic team coaching. And I've known Peter. I discovered Peter, it's probably a little bit more than 2 years ago, where in my podcast, The Team Coaching Zone, in episode number 19, I interviewed Peter. It wasn't long as I was out interviewing great team coaches around the world that I discovered Peter Hawkins, and his name kept popping up. We did a great episode, really got to know Peter, brought him to New York City in January of 2016 for a team coaching masterclass in systemic team coaching. And it's been a wonderful relationship. And I've just learned a ton from Peter. So both somebody I respect professionally, but also just as a great human being, very generous guy. And it's been wonderful getting to know you, Peter, throughout this journey. But a little bit more about Peter. So Peter, I think, is really, when you think about pioneers and thought leaders in the team coaching arena, he's definitely going to come up at the top of the list, or definitely in the top of your rankings. Been at this field for quite a bit of time, is a thought leader in the space, has published, I think, the best book on team coaching, leadership team coaching, developing collective transformational leadership, now in its third edition, which just came out this year. There's a companion book to that, which really showcases cases. But prolific writer, teacher, he's a professor at the Henley Business School, training of team coaches. But I think really what I love about Peter and his work is out there really putting this stuff to the test over decades with teams of all types and sizes, sought after speaker, trainer, presenter, working with top teams around the world. And so I couldn't imagine a better person to be having on the podcast today to get this learning started. So Peter, there's obviously a lot more that we could share about you, but I don't want to take up our precious time with all of those niceties. And what I'd love to do is turn it over to you a bit. And why don't you get us into it? And we'll, again, liberally use the chat window. I'll be monitoring what's going on in the chat, and we'll pause from time to time to build you guys into this. But let's enjoy an hour with Peter Hawkins on the new frontier in systemic team coaching beyond the high-performing team.
Great. Thank you so much, Christopher, for that very, very warm welcome. And welcome from me to everyone who's online. It's good to see we've got people online from right across America and a few other places. And it's a pleasure just to share with you what I think is a very exciting time in coaching. And actually what would be good is to ask you a question. Notice the first answer that comes into your own head, which is, what percentage of your potential to make a positive difference in the world are you using currently in your life? Out of 100%, what percentage are you using of that potential to make a positive impact? And then to ask the question, what would you like that percentage to be? Perhaps you want to write this down for yourself. What's the percentage you're using today? What would you like that percentage to be? And the third question would be, what would you have to do to get from the first percentage to the second figure? What would you have to do to make a step up in the amount of your potential that you're using to make an impact in the world? Because this is a question I've been asking myself regularly in my professional career. And I've been very lucky. I've been an organizational consultant. I've been a leader. I've been an executive coach, team facilitator. And what I'm discovering is that actually the world is changing incredibly fast. And what has made coaching really successful in the last 30 years is not what's going to make it successful in the next 30 years. And I've been privileged to have been involved with executive coaching since the very early days in the late 1970s, early 1980s. And in that time, I think we've achieved a great deal. We've seen a real shift in how leadership development has moved out of the classroom and has moved into real experience, and how it's become personalized through coaching and one-to-one tailored development programs. We've seen the growth of leadership EQ, and realizing that IQ wasn't going to get them to become effective leaders alone, but they need also EQ. There are a number of things that we've really helped. Coaching has transformed. But now I think we're being asked to step up rapidly again. And in many ways, I got involved in developing team coaching by asking the question, how do we bring the best of coaching process and what we've learned over the last 30 to 40 years in coaching with what we've learned around organizational change and transformation? And how do we build a hybrid that brings the best of consultancy and change management and the best of coaching together into an integrated approach? And I'm going to share a little bit about how I see systemic team coaching is providing, if you like, that bridge. Because I think what the world is now asking for is we're not short of really good individual coaches. We're not short of team facilitators. We're not short of consultants. But as one CEO said to me in our latest research, he said, look, Peter, I've got lots of coaches coaching my individual leaders. I've got a lot of consultants consulting to the past, but that's not where the challenges are. He said, all my challenges lie in the connections between people and the connections between the functions, between the different countries we're operating in, and between our organization and our different stakeholders. He went on to say to me, look, Peter, over the next 10 years, we're going to be employing less people. But to be effective, we're going to have to partner with far more people. And so the whole field and the whole challenges are moving from how do we just develop the individuals to how do we develop the connections inside the organization, inside the teams, but between teams and between the organization and its stakeholders. And what can coaching do to step up to that challenge? So over the last 2 years, and this is available on the Henley Business School website. And if you can't find it there, email me and we'll send you a PDF copy. We did a 2-year research. It was called Tomorrow's Leadership and the Necessary Revolution in Today's Leadership Development. And I want to suggest from that research, there's a lot of implications for what coaches need to do. We talked to 40 CEOs around the world from different sectors, different countries. And in those same organizations, we talked to the head of human resources. And we also talked to a young millennial leader that they had nominated as somebody who would be a senior leader within the next 5 to 10 years. So that we got 3 different perspectives. And we looked at their different narratives about how the world was changing. And these were some of the top challenges. The fact that all leaders are facing unceasing and accelerating change and transformation. That the technological and digital revolution is taking us into an era of joined up challenge and change beyond anything we've seen to date. And then this notion of disruption is the new norm. I love this quote from Peter Diamandis, who's at Singularity University, who says, you're either disrupting yourself and your business and your profession, or someone else is. Sitting still equals death. And today I want to look at not only how this is happening in our client organizations, but it's also happening in coaching. And how do we make sure we're disrupting the coaching profession rather than being disrupted by all the forces that are out there. And so one of the questions I started to ask is not only what is it that coaching needs to do to step up to the challenges of the next 30 years, but what is it that team coaching needs to do? And so in each edition of this book, the first edition of Leadership Team Coaching was 2011. In a second edition, 2014, and in this new edition, I talk a lot that came out this summer about where does team coaching need to go next? Because what motivates me to do this is being a grandfather, and just to show you, these are 4 of my 5 grandchildren. One thing I know about the future is that when these little people grow up and step into the world of work, and inshallah, they take on leadership roles, they will face far, far bigger challenges than anything that my incredibly privileged generation has had to face. And if I live long enough, say for another 30 years, and they've grown up and they've taken on important roles themselves, it's likely that they're going to turn to me and say, what were you coaches and you leaders doing in your greatly privileged world when you were leaving us a legacy of a world of greater demand, more people, growing expectations, and diminishing resources? Because every organization I work with around the world, and I have the privilege of working directly with quite a few and supervise team coaches in many parts of the world now, every organization that they or I work with are facing the challenge of how do we do more at higher quality with less resource. It's what I call the unholy trinity. And to do that is requiring not only that we pedal harder, but we start, because that will only get you so far, but how do we operate differently? And I think as coaches and as team coaches, we have to realize that the time when we could develop people one person at a time have gone. And today I want to suggest that even trying to develop an organization one team at a time is no longer adequate. We've got to look at how do we develop individuals and teams in connection with each other and organizations in connection with their business ecosystem. So we've got to bring together the skills of coaches and the skills of organizational development consultants and create joint ways of working that accelerate the business of transforming human consciousness. So 5 areas in which I think we kind of need to step up. The first is how we stop seeing the individual or the individual team as our client. And as team coaches, we don't ask team members, well, what do you want from team coaching? We start by asking them, who does your work serve? Who are your stakeholders? And what is the world of tomorrow asking your team to step up to? So I think that as team coaches, we need to be standing shoulder to shoulder with the teams we work with, not facing them as our client and asking them what they want, but what is it their world needs them to step up to be fit for the future. And then as you'll see further along here, I think, and I'm going to end this talk by saying how do we break down the silos between leadership development, coaching, organizational development, consulting, and strategy, to realize that we're all part of a bigger and a higher purpose, which is how do we help evolve individuals, teams, and organizations that are future fit. And this means that we've got to create a far more integrated way of working. So let me just say then, this has taken me into looking at, and across all the books I've written, I've looked at teams and all the team research, but also looked at different approaches to team coaching around the world. Today, I'm going to suggest to you that there are kind of 4 kind of levels of team coaching. And historically, we've been kind of moving through these. The first is people who see the team as the sum of the team members, and who believe if we can develop all the team members, give them all great individual coaching, and then we can get them to have good relationships, we'll have an effective team. Kind of this approach is very much looking at how do we get a team that trusts each other, has good consensus and harmony, and is very much built around individual and interpersonal development. However, all the research that I've reviewed around what makes a team highly effective says, yes, it's good to have good relationships. Yes, it's good to get on well together, but that is not what makes you effective as a team. Yeah. So the next level of team coaching, which I call system team coaching as opposed to systemic, is where we start to see the team is an entity in its own right. So it considers the team as a living system and is more than the sum of its parts. But actually it looks as the team and it creates the boundary around the edges of the team. Who's in the team, who's outside the team, and how do we make what's inside that boundary effective? So we look at how do we have effective meetings, clarity of roles, generative dialogue in our meetings, and collaboration between the various team members. But it's still looking with inside the boundary. And in this approach, people are focusing on the team dynamic. So we're making not all the individual members our client, but we're making the team as an entity our client. But I developed systemic team coaching, and here's the shift from system team coaching to systemic, is where we actually see that the team is not just created by the individuals, and them understanding each other and getting on well together is important, or the team being effective as a unit is important. But we see that the thing that makes a team effective is having a common purpose that they recognize that they cannot achieve by working in parallel. A common challenge or purpose that requires them to collaborate and be more than some of their parts. And that actually what's going on in the team is created not just by the people within the team, but by the team stakeholders and the dynamic between the stakeholders and the team. I recently was saying, look, when I was first working with leadership teams, we used to take teams off to nice hotels and help them develop their strategy and their vision. And we were working on the assumption that a team creates its mission and its vision. And now I believe the opposite is equally true. It's the mission and the vision that creates the team, not the team, the mission. The challenge or the mission is out there in the world waiting for a team to respond to it. And so rather than asking, what does the team want from team coaching, we're asking future back and outside in questions. Who are your critical stakeholders? What is it they need from the team? The investors, the customers, the partner organizations, the employees, the communities where you operate. And not only what do they want today from the team, but what are they going to need in the future? So systemic team coaching has this future back and outside in orientation, and is built on, this is the latest edition of the book, a way of working with the team which is not just based on running a series of away days, but is an ongoing relationship where we work with the whole team, both when they're together and when they're apart, not just on away days or in team meetings. Not only to help them improve their collective performance as a team and how they work together, but also how do they take collective leadership to more effectively engage with all their key stakeholder groups to transform the wider business, and now in the third edition, I would say, to also transform their business ecosystem. And I'll come on to that. So let me just unpack that. What I'm saying is that team coaching is a relationship, not an event. It's where we're working in partnership, not working as a supplier. It's where we're working not only on what happens within the team, but the dynamic relationships between the team and its stakeholders. So the core model that we use within that is this 5 disciplines model. In this model, if we start in the top right, we're saying there's 5 areas where a team has to be really effective. The first is it has to be clear about why it's a team. What's its commission? And that isn't a one-off process. It's not also just a top-down process where, the leadership team says, well, look, this is what the board have asked us as the executive team to do. Or as the marketing team, this is what the executive want us to do. The commissioning is also about what is it that our investors, our customers, the people who report to us, the communities where we operate, all the different stakeholders, what are they needing us to step up to? And of course, that's changing all the time. And I often point out that the word commissioning is also co-missioning. I've actually worked with senior leadership teams who say, well, it's not clear what we're needing to do because the board have not told us yet. And I say to them, well, how much do you get paid to wait for the board to tell you what to do? Which kind of wakes them up to the realization that actually what they need to do is to kind of, if you like, start to frame their commission and then go to the board and say, look, this is what we think we need to do to create value for all our stakeholders, and allow the board to then come back and respond to that and say, well, it's partly that, but also you haven't thought about this and that. It's a dynamic relationship commissioning between you and your bosses, your stakeholders. So when we're clear in that top right box about the commission, that's the why we're a team. We then have to come inside. We have to clarify, in order to achieve that why, what's our strategic priorities? What are our team KPIs? What's our purpose as a team that we cannot achieve except through collaboration? What are our goals, our objectives, our processes, and the roles we need within the team? And again, as the commission changes, the clarifying changes. As the clarifying changes, so does the commission. This is a dynamic process. So commissioning is about why, clarifying is about what. And it has to be done jointly by the team. Because if the team don't co-create their team charter, they won't fully own it. And one of the things that's changed team coaching is we've moved beyond the day where companies can be run by heroic CEOs and teams can be run by heroic team leaders. We need everyone in the leadership team not just to take responsibility for their function, but to take co-leadership of the whole. And that means we have to have a team that co-create their team charter, not just have it cascaded down upon them by the team leader. So commissioning is about the why, clarifying is about the what, co-creating is about the how. This is where we do work with the team dynamic. How do we need to operate together? How do we need to have the right conversations to achieve the what, to achieve the why? This is about, how do we have effective meetings? How do we deal with team conflict? Recognizing that some of what emerges down here in interpersonal conflict in the team is not interpersonal, but is us enacting some of our stakeholder conflict. So I work with lots of teams and boards, and people say, oh, well, we have an impossible conflict between our CEO and our board chairman. It's because they're both big egos. But often chairman and CEOs have conflict because one of them is holding the interests of the investors and the regulators, and the other is holding the interests of the customer, the supplier, the employees. And so what they're enacting interpersonally has its root in stakeholder conflict. But once we've worked with the why, the what, the how, we've then got to work with the who. How can each member of that team represent the whole of the team when they're out there engaging with all the key stakeholders? The investors, the customers, the suppliers, the partner organizations, the profession. That's where the true value is created, not when the team's in their away day or the team meeting. It's created when they're transforming the value they're co-creating with and for their stakeholders. So I have now said, look, rather than talk about high-performing teams, because the high performance doesn't reside within the team boundaries, we should more correctly talk about how do we have teams that co-create value with and for all their stakeholders. A highly valuable and highly effective team is one that is constantly co-creating value with and for all its stakeholders. And finally, that takes us into that fifth discipline in the middle. Because of the speed of change we're working with, if a team is only managing those four quadrants and not growing its capacity, both individually and collectively, to do more at higher quality with less resource, and growing its capacity and its agility to respond and its fitness for the future, it's only becoming more effective at managing today and yesterday's problems. So that fifth discipline, which is often the most neglected in many leadership teams, because they're so busy dealing with all today's issues, that they're not managing how we're growing our capacity for tomorrow. That is becoming more and more essential. And how is the team constantly the place where we are not only managing the other four disciplines, but we're growing the capacity to do more without just pedaling harder. So let me pause there, Krista, before I go on to the fourth level.
Great timing.
About where I think that the edge is. What are the questions that are coming in?
Yeah. So we got two of them here in the chat window. One of them just came in from Stephen, who asked, I've come to think of purpose as more of a why. How come it's in clarifying instead of commissioning?
A very good question. It needs to be in both, right? Because in commissioning, it's what is the purpose that our stakeholders need our help with. Yeah. So it's if you like, that's we are going to receive from our employees, the people who report to us, from our colleagues, the other teams across the business, from the people above us, from our customers, our partners, the community. We're going to receive lots of different needs and purpose they have in partnering with us, different partnership purposes. Our job as a team then is to look at how do we create a unifying purpose for our team. And for me, that team primary purpose is what is it we can uniquely achieve as a team that we can't achieve by working in parallel. We can only achieve through collaboration as a team, that the world, our ecosystem, our world of tomorrow needs. So if you like, in that clarifying, we have to put together all the different stakeholder voices and needs and requirements, and out of that create a unifying purpose. Yeah.
Great.
And just to say a bit more about that, what so often happens is I've worked with so many teams in which they'll subdivide all their stakeholder needs. So they'll say, all right, HR, you look after the employee needs. Finance department, you look after the investor needs. Sales, you look after the customer needs. Supply chain, you look after the supplier needs. Corporate social responsibility, you look after the community and ecology needs. And what they don't realize is that's just segmenting this. The real art for a team is to create the synergy and the join up between those different needs into a unified synergistic system. Because those needs don't exist in separate boxes. Yeah? Mm. And if we subdivide them in the team, then actually what will happen is we'll just create organizational conflict, and we'll wonder why, the HR department are arguing for one thing and the sales are arguing, we've got to be able to reduce our prices, and the investors are saying we need to raise our profits. Yeah. Mm. And so actually as a team, every team is having to manage what I call stakeholder contention, the conflict in our stakeholder world, and find a way of bringing that into some form of integration. Hopefully that starts to address that question. Mm. But it's a good question because purpose exists in both.
Yeah. And Stephen replied, he said, so the purpose in commissioning is much bigger than the team, whereas the purpose in clarifying is what the team can actually accomplish.
Yes, what they can uniquely do that integrates the multiple needs of their stakeholders. Mm.
Okay. Caroline also had a comment here. Many teams are struggling with both the dynamics and achieving the tasks goals within their boundary. This is asking a lot, though. I agree with what you assert. And then we had...
Of course. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
The task and the dynamics, in some ways I've split them here, but I think part of the art of ourselves as team coaches is to find the dynamics in the midst of task, yeah, and use task in the midst of the dynamics. If that isn't too cryptic. I wrote a blog earlier this year. I think you read it, Christo, which wasn't by chance. It was just before my 40th wedding anniversary. And in the blog, the title of it was, "Partnerships are not created by partners. They're created by the purpose that the partners can only achieve through their collaboration." And I wrote that about business mergers, team partnership, and marriage partnership. Yeah? And the only way you have a successful marriage is because the purpose that creates your partnership is always changing. It may start off by the purpose of our relationship is to have a good time together, and then it might be to have children together, and then it might be to help those children grow up, and then it might be we've got some projects together, and then it might be about grandchildren. But constantly, it's the purpose that's creating the partnership, and the partnership that are creating the purpose. The task is creating the dynamic, and the dynamic is creating the task. Yeah.
Good. So I get a couple of other questions are starting to feed in here, Peter. Let me know if you want to move on at some point. We had one earlier from Lawyer who said, Peter, what is the best practice you can suggest to begin getting the various functions together to start the collaboration process? Or is it organization development, strategy, coaching, etc.? How do we get these silos to start collaborating?
Right. Go back to what I just said about it's the purpose that creates the partnership. To get the silos, I'm working on a big 2 financial companies that have just merged. both global companies, and we're working helping them do the cultural merger. And how we get not only the partnership across the merger but across the functions is we have to find what is the purpose of the collaboration. So rather than bringing together and say, how do we collaborate better? What is it they all recognize they need to achieve, but they cannot achieve except through collaboration? Does that make sense? So rather than think, do we need OD? Do we need coaching? Do we need strategy? What we've got to start from is what is the need that requires our collaboration? The question I always start with collaboration work is what can we uniquely do together, right, that we cannot do apart? Mm. And then, okay, so what is it? What's the purpose that we need each other for? And therefore, that the how follows the what, which follows the why. Mm. That makes sense? And that's why I shall come on to in a moment. That part of that, I think, then requires us to not only bring in coaching skills and team coaching skills and systemic team coaching skills, but how do we coach the relationship between teams? Yep.
Yeah.
But if I've got two teams I'm coaching the relationship between, I've got three clients. I've got, the sales department, production department, and the third client, which is the world that requires their collaboration, the joint purpose. Yep. Hmm. It's never a dyad. Okay.
Cool. Do you want to keep going? We have more in the window, so I'm sure we can burn out.
Well, one more, and then I'll move on to the fourth level.
All right. Well, I'm going to do somebody injustice here because I've got three to pick from, but maybe I'll pick this one. Where does the team coach stand in each of these disciplines?
Where do they stand?
Yeah, like what's the role of the team coach, or where do they stand in relation to these disciplines?
Well, that's something, what we've developed both in the book and when we do these 3-day systemic team coaching certificate programs, is we teach, if you like, a whole methodology for each of the four, but then develop, what's the unifying approach which holds these five disciplines together. But there are different skills. There are a lot of skills that people who are very good group coaches and team facilitators, there's a whole skill set that people already have in the co-creating. What we discovered is that wherever people start, they're needing to develop different disciplines for each of these, different methodologies for each of these 5 disciplines. And then what we're trying to do is then what's the integrated journey? Because, of course, these things don't just exist in separate boxes. So that's an advert to say, if you really want to know the answer to that, come on the 3-day course. The fourth level, which I think is the research on tomorrow's world and tomorrow's leadership is really throwing up, is ecosystemic team coaching. I indicated earlier on that several CEOs said to me, and I was shocked to find that most organizations, large organizations, have had zero growth in employment, in the number of people they're employing in the last 10 years. And nearly all of them are predicting they'll be employing less people in the next 5 years. So although there are more people employed in the world today than ever, all of that growth is coming from SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprise, startups, and the not-for-profit sector. Big, large organizations are employing less people. But most of them said to me, we will have less people we're employing because of digitalization, robotics, outsourcing. But the number of people we're going to have to partner with to be successful is getting much greater and more complex. So a lot of the challenges for leadership are moving away from leading my people, my team, my function, my organization, to how do I orchestrate a business ecosystem? How do I lead more and more people who aren't part of our payroll or who report to me? You know, more companies who are at the cutting edge are having their customers do their sales for them, and they're using competitions to do all their R&D around the world with unpaid sales forces and unpaid research and development departments. So the world is moving, and therefore leadership is moving. And that means that the nature of team coaching is moving. And more we're having to look at not just coaching the team on away days, but coaching them live at their interfaces with their important stakeholders. We're also having to, as that question indicated, how do we bring, we start from what are the organizational challenges and say, well, who do we need to bring into the room to address that challenge? And how do we as coaches develop the skills, not just to coach the parts and coach the individuals, but to coach the connections? And this is where I think there's a really exciting area of development, of inter-team coaching, team of teams coaching, getting more of the system into the room. To give you just two examples, I think I've got some of them here if it's not too small to read. Very simple thing that I do with many boards that I've been working with is a very simple first step is I always have 3 or 4 empty chairs in the boardroom. And on the empty chairs, on one I put the employees, on one I put the word investors, and on one I put the word customers. Occasionally, excuse me, sneezing. Occasionally I put our collective grandchildren. And when we get into a dynamic, intense, strategic conversation in the boardroom, I say, right, stop, pause. I want non-executive directors to step out of their roles and occupy one of those chairs to speak from the customer position, the collective grandchildren position, the investor position, so that we're getting the stakeholders' voices into the boardroom, not just the directors' voices and the backseat CEO voices, where everyone's telling the CEO how they would do it were they the CEO. Another one we've worked a lot with is coaching a leadership team, and at the same time coaching a shadow millennial leadership team. It's been working on the same strategic challenges the leadership team's been working on, which is young people who are very bright, the future leaders. And we've coached both groups, but then, importantly, it doesn't work if you say, let's get the millennial shadow leadership team to come and report back to the leadership team. Because that just falls into old power dynamics and old culture, where the leadership team say, thank you very much for your great ideas. Very, very interesting. We'll take them away and think about them, which means they'll get parked somewhere. So what we do now is we coach the space between those two and bring them together. A recent one we did, we said to the millennials, your job isn't just to present to the senior team and the senior team to present to you, but both teams, your job is to see how many mindset shifts you can register in the other team. So now we're getting teams to coach the other team. Leadership team to coach the millennials to coach. It's team-on-team coaching. And then the next thing we did with that same organization, we said, all right, now we're going to have an hour in which you have to come up with better answers than either of you have come up with in your separate group team meetings. Yeah? So now we're creating generative thinking between teams, not just within teams. And I think this is where the cutting edge of the work is going. And I know Chris has had, and you can go and listen to it on his Team Coaching Zone, one of the people who wrote the book with General McChrystal on Team of Teams. And I love this quote from his book, General McChrystal's book on Team of Teams, where he says, the world's growing faster and more interdependent. We need to figure out ways to scale the fluidity of teams across entire organizations, and I would say across entire ecosystems, business ecosystems. So that he's saying, how do we create the same trust and collaboration between teams as we've learned to do within teams? And I think this is the leading edge of where team coaching is having to go. And also, I mentioned shadow boards and shadow leadership teams, but more and more we're working with organizations that are setting up edge teams, which are startups within the organization. But it's no good just coaching the startup business within the big system and then coaching the leadership team in the big system. What we've got to create is the two-way learning between those two worlds. Because otherwise we just have a nice little isolated team working over there that will be rejected by the culture of the big team. And then what I've been saying around this generally is, if coaching in the last 30 years has taken us on the journey from IQ to EQ, part of the journey of the next 10 years is how do we go from EQ to WEQ. And by WEQ, I mean collaborative intelligence, the intelligence to create teams that are more than the sum of the parts, and businesses that are more than the sum of the teams, and collaborations between organizations that are more than the sum of the organizations. And within that, I've also said we've got to go from IQ to EQ to WEQ to the more than WEQ. And that is realizing that collaboration is also with our wider, more than human ecology, as well as with our human ecology. We cannot just do this in a human-centric way, but in a wider ecological understanding way. So one of the most radical things I've been saying is that within 5 years, we won't have separate HR departments, strategy departments, coaching functions, leadership, development functions. These will all have to become one function, what I'm calling the fit for the future function, co-evolving the organizational capacity in dynamic dialogue with the wider business ecosystem. And that's where ecosystemic team coaching is at the heart of this wider collective endeavor. And indeed, if you go onto the website and you look up the B team in B Corps, that they are very much on that same dimension. They've got people like Paul Polman from Unilever. They've got a Chinese chief exec, an American chief exec, Richard Branson from Virgin, where they're saying that no longer is it okay for the purpose of a business just to make a profit for its shareholders. Actually, they have to step up. Every organization has to step up to becoming a driving force for social, environmental, and economic benefits beyond their own system. And I suppose, if you like, what I'm trying to do for the coaching world and the consultancy world is to say, we as a profession have to also step up to beyond business as usual. We have to look at how do we step up to creating value beyond that for our narrow confines of our coaching profession or our team coaching profession to a bigger role and a bigger purpose. So I'll come on to that in a minute. Other questions, Krista, that have come in?
There's some good ones in here. One of them, just somebody wanted a quick definition of what's the difference again of red teams and black teams?
They come from different worlds. The Black Ops team came from the world of how do we set up a team to it's in the technology world about to hack into our own systems to find out where we're vulnerable, right? So it's purposely setting up a team to find the weaknesses in your own system. To devil's advocate, you could do it within a team. You can set up, who's going to have the devil advocacy role in this team meeting to challenge our group assumptions and our group norms. That would be a similar process. Red teams were set up after the appalling kind of groupthink that went on about the Iraq War, which was how do we set up people who are going to challenge the dominant thinking that has been developed within government or within a business. Yeah. So that red teams, black op teams, edge teams, shadow teams are all ways of setting up something to disrupt from within. Yeah. They just have different historical origins. I write about all of them in the latest edition of the book.
Yeah, so if you've gotten the first or second edition, the third edition gets in more to these forms of teams. We got a couple other great questions here I want to pop out, Peter. One of them is about whether you can do this kind of coaching alone, or do you need to be a part of a team of team coaches? And the question was from Winnie, said the way team coaching is being described as holistically impacting the organization at every level. Is this the type of work that can be effectively and successfully done with one team coach, or do we need a team of coaches? Maybe it depends on the size of the organization.
Yeah, to work systemically, I've always said that the minimum you need to work with a team systemically is a 1+1 team. And by that I mean one person working with a team and one who's not just the supervisor you go to when there's a problem, but somebody who's also holding and reflecting on that team in an ongoing way. And this is where I think, as some of you know, I've written a lot about the whole area of supervision in coaching. And in systemic team coaching, it's not a nice to have, it's an essential, and it has to be more than problem-centered. As soon as you're doing ecosystemic team coaching or team and teams work, then I think you need a minimum of a 2+1 team. Yeah? Because if you're working with a team or a system in an ongoing way, you become part of the culture you're trying to impact. And that's where you need multiple perspectives in the coaching team. Mm. So what 1+1 if you're working just with a team, 2+1 if you're working with multiple teams. Mm. It's the minimum, not the maximum, the minimum.
Nice. Max has a great question here. He says, he or she says, I see ecosystemic team coaching as aligned with the recognition in the leadership literature of multi-team systems theory. Do you see that connection? Can you discuss approaches or methodologies for working at that level? In other words, not just coaching a unitary team's position within its ecosystem, but working at the ecosystem level itself.
Yeah, it does. As suggested in the question, it does work. This is aligned to a number of new approaches around thinking about leadership, new approaches about thinking about like Laloux's work on teal organizations, Otto Scharmer's work on Theory U and how change happens. It's also very much in line with people like Gregory Bates, and to go back some ways, work on understanding complex adaptive systems. And what it's saying, to go back to an answer I gave earlier, is it's always looking from a triadic rather than a dyadic perspective. Yeah. So if you're looking at a team, you're looking at collaboration between two teams. You're always looking at not just what's going on in Team A and Team B and in the space between Team A and Team B, but you're looking at what is the purpose that that can only be achieved by Team A and Team B's collaboration. So you're looking at a triangle with purpose and the joint challenge being the third point of the triangle. And then you're looking at what does that purpose require, not only from Team A and Team B, but from their collaboration and the space between them. So it's drawing on relational theory and systemic theory. Yeah? Do come back to me if that's not clear or doesn't really answer the question. But it is saying, that the best place to start by doing team on teams, or even within a team, is not to say, what do the individuals need from the team, but what do the stakeholders need from the team, and therefore what does the team need from the individuals? To go from purpose back, not individual forward. Yep.
Good.
What can we uniquely do that the world of tomorrow needs? What can we do together that we cannot do apart? These are the great starting place. And that means that we have to be work systemically, and that's where we need to work in partnership and not see the team as our client. Yeah. But the team is we, the team, are partnering in service of the team's current and future stakeholders. So, quick story. I was working with an organization, and which had gone through, it was in South Africa, in the midst of the massive changes in South Africa. Very radical change on many, many fronts. And the chief executive, post the merger, had taken me out and said, "Don't challenge me in front of my team like that. You have to remember, I'm your client." One of those lovely moments where, you think, oh gosh, this contract could either end in tears here, or we're going to move to a new level. And I said to him, look, John, if I've embarrassed you or been inappropriate or disrespectful, I apologize. However, I need to make one thing clear. You're not my client. You are an important gatekeeper and you do sign the checks. But the day I make you my client is the day I stop adding real value here. What we need to focus on, John, is that actually your team isn't my client, your organization isn't my client. We have to look at what is it we have to achieve together for this organization to meet the needs of your stakeholders. And the biggest was that they were the main industry for rural sustainability across South Africa. That was our joint client. And by having a joint client that we need each other in order to serve, that's how we build partnership. Does that make sense? And that was a turning point in the work. And the good news is he did take me into his next organization. But it all depended on me having the courage and the chutzpah at that moment, not just to step back into supplier mode under the bullying of the chief executive. Yeah? But to stick to, we are shoulder to shoulder facing a much bigger client than either of us. Any last questions?
Yeah, I'd love to squeeze one more in here. We have one by Wildfire Strategies. How do you apply this in workplace cultures with long-standing entrenched hierarchies, like in healthcare where the medical model keeps doctors at a higher hierarchical level than nurses and others?
I have done some work within the health service, and the same principles apply. I did a talk in the UK on how coaching could save the NHS, the National Health Service, but not as we know it. People immediately said, is this coaching not as we know it, or the health service not as we know it? And I said both. Because I said, look, the only way our health service is going to survive, or Obamacare is going to survive and get to the next level, is if the medical professions, all of them, stop treating patients and start partnering patients to help them manage their own health. Yeah? So we've got to build partnership right at the patient interface, not just in the operating theatre. But if you read what's the book by Gawanda called The Checklist Manifesto, looking at the fact that in America 170,000 unnecessary deaths happen in the operating theatre. Yeah. And they've discovered that the best thing you can do in the operating theatre, if you've got somebody who's been brought in as an emergency and is bleeding on the operating table, is to stop for 2 minutes, get every team member to say their name, their role, and what they are most concerned about in the operation they're collectively about to do. Because they've discovered if you don't do that check-in at the beginning of the operation, people don't speak up if they're not the top of the hierarchy in the middle of things going wrong. And I think that's a great analogy for what we've got to do in all teams, not just health teams. How do we get clear about, actually, we can only succeed if everyone here is a full member of the team taking responsibility for the whole, not just for their part. And that means we have to have new forms of check-in, in our board meetings as well as our operating theatres.
Great.
Let me just say, because we're running out of time, 2 things. I will be running the 3-day intensive certificate programs on systemic team coaching in America this coming year, New York in January, and then Los Angeles in April, and then up in Victoria Island near Vancouver later in April. And I'm sure Krista would attest from the last one we did in New York. These are very intensive, where you get to learn the methodologies of all 5 disciplines, but you actually work live on a simulated team. So you get to actually do the coaching, not just talk about it and learn it theoretically. We've got a very good team simulation, which means that everyone who's on the program is part of a coaching team, working with colleagues, both doing an inquiry on this team and then intervening in at least one of the 5 disciplines, so that we cover all 5 within the 3 days. So if you are able to come, it'd be great to see any of you on it. Krista's going to, I think, send round to have everyone on the seminar details about that. And if you want the books, they're all on Amazon. So that's the adverts.
Thanks, Peter. You did that part of the work for me. I was planning to do that for you, but thanks for doing that. And Peter, it's always great being in conversation with you. And, in a little hour here, we try to boil the ocean, but, my hope is to plant some seeds for folks. And, in the follow-up, we will send you a link to this session so that you can watch it again if you like. Peter, there was a request whether we could send the slides out to the group or not in that communication, or is that something you're willing to share? Or?
Yep, I'll get Fiona to turn them into a PDF and send them across to you, so you can send those out. Yeah,
I'll also capture some of the resources. There are some blog posts. I dropped them in the chat window. The research report, your article around the 40th year of your wedding anniversary. So I'll drop that all in there. I have a couple of podcasts with Peter I'll include links to, and links to Peter's books. And then again, if you're interested in this training program in New York City, we have a few seats left, and would love to see you guys for that. And really good stuff. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here. And
can I just say one last thing, Krista?
Yeah, go ahead.
Happy Halloween!
Yeah, that's right. Trick or treat. For those of you who are, I'm taking my 7-year-old out in a couple hours. I'm excited to do that. So good stuff. And Peter, are you free to stick around for a few more minutes, or do you got to rush off?
I'm free for about another 5 minutes.
Okay, so we'll kind of stick around here. So this formally ends the session for today. If folks want to linger around and drop in a few more questions, we can do that. But thanks everybody for coming today. We had about 200 people signed up for today. I think we had 90 or more make it to the live session. So great to have this great representation around the world. And thank you so much for joining. And great job, Peter, as always.
Thanks a lot, and thank you for giving up your your lunchtime to be with us, or your evening, depending on where you were.
Yeah, Peter, one thing that was coming up for me as you were talking is I'm thinking a lot about sort of organization design. And a lot of the team coaching that we've learned and we've been grappling with is sort of being applied to a model of siloing and, trying to help people work across silos and such. And I know some of the, people are really trying to disrupt how organizations are fundamentally designed in and of themselves and getting rid. I think you alluded to that, where these separate functions are no longer separate functions. They're embedded in the teams and the groups. You look at holacracy, other similar models. And so I guess, one of the things that's coming up for me is around team coaching and systemic team coaching as a way of doing business, which becomes embedded in the DNA and into the culture of the organization rather than embodied in roles of people like us who may be externals or internal. So I'm curious about your thoughts about that. I think the organizations that we're coaching are also changing, and I don't know if that resonates or makes sense, but
I think we have to become more fluid in our approaches as organizations are having to become more fluid. So we've talked about the boundaryless organization. We're having teams now that are constantly fluid in their membership, and teams that have to operate on core team and network team. So I think we're having to develop an agility and a fluidity in that dimension. But then your second part is, I think a lot of what we've been successful about doing in the coaching profession is because a lot of stuff. I used to describe coaching as outsourcing difficult conversations. So, if I had a difficulty with Fred, I would ring up HR and say, look, will you sort Fred out for me? And HR would try and be helpful and say, oh, yes, we'll have a meeting with Fred. And then they think, oh, this is a bit difficult. I'll ring up I'll go to the local directory of coaches and find an exec coach for them. And I think more and more, a lot of that coaching is having to go back to where it belongs, which is helping managers and leaders all have the coaching skills to have the difficult conversations themselves. And that means that we as coaches have to move on to what can't be done by managers. And in the same way as we've now got,
which is the interlinkages or the ecosystemic view, or what is that?
Yeah, is very hard to coach a system that you're part of. Yeah. So we're working with one of the big four professional services firms, training senior partners to coach their own teams. Yeah. But we're also putting in alongside them systemic team coaches that we've trained within that organization to support them, because there are certain bits. And what we're saying to those systemic team coaches who are internal, don't take over coaching the team. Get the team leader to coach their own team. But there will be times where the team leader has to become a part of the team that's been looked at and become a full member of that system. And that's where the team coach has to take a role that the team leader can't. But it's a partnership. It's more fluid than we take over and coach the team. So I think you're pointing to a level of fluidity and agility that unfortunately cannot be captured in coaching competencies and coaching methodologies, because it is having to evolve faster than those things evolve.
Right. Good.
So I think there's some big questions for EMCC and ICF and others about how do we get that agility and fluidity into our profession.
Yep. So there was a question, Peter, I know if you got to go, let me know, but from Tanya here, it says, Peter, I have a question. How does the 3-day course differ from what we did with you on the Master of Science program at Henley?
great. The MSc program that I go and do a sort of guest slot for at Henley Business School, which is their masters in coaching and behavioral change. I go and introduce some of the stuff there, but the 3-day program is a deep immersion in actually working through not only the 5 disciplines and how do you coach each of the 5, but also how do you do the co-inquiry phase with the team, on the grounds that you can't just apply a methodology. You have to go and the first phase of working with a team is a collaborative inquiry between you and the team and the stakeholders. What is it that the world of tomorrow and the wider stakeholder ecosystem and the team members are all needing this team to step up to? And I think that phase is so important. We spend a lot of the first day of the 3-day, working on that phase, not only just theoretically, but practicing that with this team simulation. Once we've done that, the whole, everybody on the program is divided into small coaching groups that then have to go and take one of the disciplines. Each one takes a different discipline, and they have to make an intervention into that team that we've all collaboratively inquired into. So it's highly experiential, but it is also kind of highly structured around learning some of the different elements and putting them together. And it's also, I should say, it's the first module for those who want to go on and do the 1-year diploma. We run a 1-year with the Academy of Executive Coaching on their website, a whole year's diploma course where people are working through the year on an external coaching client, an organizational client, and then bringing that to each of the modules. We've run that in London, we've run that in South Africa, and there are plans for us to also be running it in America.
Great. Hey, Peter, I saw earlier in your deck you had something on 7 traps for team coaches that I don't think you had the time to go over. And maybe you did that intentionally or not. I want to call you on it because I think that it was of interest to me. I know it's probably I think it's in your book, right?
There's a whole chapter in the book. But just to briefly go back to it.
Yeah, there you are.
A lot we've covered today, so let's just end on this because then I've got to go and talk to a client. The first one, many clients don't know what they can ask for. So they say, please come and run an away day, right? And our job at that stage is to say, well, look, what do you want to achieve by having an away day? And when they say, well, we've got to transform the team, to say, and how do you think you're going to do that in a 1-day off-site? and help them look at what are the possibilities. The second one is, well, a lot of team coaches that I've worked with and trained, they're stuck sort of selling team coaching in event-sized pieces, rather than knowing how to get a team to buy into a 1-year transformational program. Yeah. And if you're working with them over the year, then that's probably a mixture of some inquiry phase, some off-site workshops, some sitting in on their teams, some working with a team leader, perhaps helping them facilitate an engagement with their stakeholders. Yeah. So I will often start with an inquiry process, including the 360 feedback on the team from all their stakeholders. And in a year's time, we'll redo the 360 to see what's shifted from what they planned. The third one I've talked about, where we see the team leader is the client, or the HR person who's brought us in. We become the supplier rather than partnering them and seeing their stakeholders as our joint client. The fourth one we've talked about. The fourth one is it's so easy for teams to say, look, come and help us trust each other, have better meetings, a tick box of the things they think they need to do to be high performing, perhaps based on Lencioni or 7 criteria of high performing teams. And then then they're focusing on inputs and outputs, not on outcomes or value creation. They're seeing becoming a high performing team as an end in itself, or great meetings an end in itself, or trusting each other as an end in itself, rather than that's a means to being more than some of our parts, in order that we can partner better with our stakeholders to co-create more value. So how do we focus on outcomes, not on inputs or outputs? The sixth one is this notion that increasingly leadership in a team is not just leading the people who report to you. It's leading 100 times more people who don't report to you, many of whom are outside your organization. So, I will ask people how they lead their unpaid sales force, or the people who they need to be promoting their organization, who they don't employ. Just as one example. And then the final one that relates back to the fifth is thinking, being a successful team is a place we arrive at. We know that the most dangerous place to arrive at is becoming number one team in your organization, or number one organization in your sector. Because success, as Kodak teaches us, as Olivetti taught us, as IBM taught us, is being really successful is what makes you blind to the fact that the world is moving on and leaving you behind. So let's never make becoming a successful team the place of arrival, right? Rather than the beginning of the journey.
Nice.
So that's a great summary. With that, yeah. I need to go.
That's a good place to end, Peter. Thank you so much, sir. Great
to join you all, and thank you, Krista, for hosting it.
Yeah, and we'll see you in New York in a couple months.
You take care.
All right, take care. Thanks, everyone.